Story 1. I've always believed that some places don't just exist in the world, you exist inside them, like they've wrapped around you and decided whether or not to let you out. That's what Skinwalker Ranch felt like to me. I didn't go there chasing UFOs or Bigfoot or any of that crap. I went because a friend of mine knew the owners in the late 90s and said they needed extra hands after some cattle had gone missing. I was young, broke, and didn't care much for ghost stories. A job was a job. But by the time I left, I wasn't sure if the land itself had swallowed a part of me. The first thing I noticed was how wrong the air felt. You know how most ranches smell like dirt, animals, hay, maybe manure? This place was quiet in a way that didn't sit right. The wind blew, but it was like it didn't carry sound. Even the cows looked uneasy. They didn't graze. They stared like something just out of view had their full attention. At night, the silence grew so heavy, you could hear your own blood moving in your ears. I didn't think much of it at first. Ranches are ranches, and spooky vibes didn't scare me. That changed fast. The first real incident happened on my second week there. I was heading back to the bunkhouse when I saw what looked like a massive wolf standing near the corral. At first I figured it was just a big stray dog, maybe mangy. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't right. Its head was too broad, its legs too long, and its eyes didn't shine like animal eyes normally do. They looked dull, like old glass. I shouted to scare it off, but it didn't move. It just stood there staring. Then, without making a sound, it turned and walked toward the fence. Not around it, not over it. It looked like it passed through the fence as if it wasn't even there. I stopped dead in my tracks and didn't sleep that night. The owners tried to make sense of things in their own ways. They'd seen it too, or at least something like it. They said sometimes it took bullets without falling, and other times it would vanish mid-step. I thought they were exaggerating until I saw for myself. One evening, we heard a commotion near the cattle pen. Something huge was moving fast. I rushed out with the others, and we saw the same wolf-like thing attacking one of the cows. The rancher fired at it point blank, multiple shots. The sound echoed across the field, but the thing didn't flinch. It looked up at us with that same glassy stare, then bolted. Only it didn't run like an animal should. It blurred like watching a bad tape on fast forward, and then it was gone. We searched the entire property, found nothing. The cow died the next day, and whatever killed it left no normal wounds. From there, it only escalated. Lights began appearing in the fields at night. At first I thought they were ATVs, or maybe neighbors with flashlights, but they floated. Perfect spheres of glowing light, moving in deliberate patterns. Sometimes they'd zip off into the distance, other times they hovered just out of reach. I saw one dart straight into a cow pasture and then vanish, only for us to find another mutilated cow the next morning. No blood, no tracks, just an animal gutted with surgical precision. The owners started whispering that the lights were connected to the deaths. I didn't argue, but the strangest moment, the one that keeps me awake even now, happened when we set up cameras. A research team had come by to document the weird activity, so they installed surveillance all over the ranch. One night I was helping check the feeds when we noticed one camera had gone dead. We went out to inspect, expecting maybe an animal had chewed the wires. Instead, we found the camera on the ground. Its mount had been carefully unscrewed, and the tape binding the cables had been peeled away. Layer by layer, not torn, like someone with hands had done it. The bizarre part? The camera right next to it, which should have recorded everything, showed absolutely nothing. One frame it was intact, the next it was gone. No figures, no shadows, no explanation. Things got worse for me personally after that. I started feeling like I was being watched all the time, even when no one else was around. I'd hear footsteps behind me, heavy ones, but every time I turned there was nothing. Tools would go missing, then show up hours later in places I'd already searched. My bunk creaked at night as if someone sat down on the edge of it, but I'd wake up to emptiness. The breaking point came when I saw something that wasn't supposed to exist. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. I stepped outside to clear my head, and that's when I noticed a patch of the air shimmering like heat waves. At first I thought it was my eyes playing tricks, but then it widened, like a door opening. Through it I could see something else, another place maybe. The sky on the other side was red, not like a sunset, but blood red, with a black shape moving across it. Then crawling through that opening came a figure. I swear on my life, it wasn't human. It had long limbs that bent wrong, and its head shifted as though it wasn't solid. It saw me, or at least I felt it noticed me, and the second it stepped through, the shimmer snapped shut. I ran back inside, locked the door, and didn't leave until sunrise. I left the ranch a week later. I told the owners I couldn't handle the stress, which wasn't a lie. But the truth is, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that night wanted me to see it. Like it knew I was there. Like the ranch itself was showing me something on purpose. I don't know what I experienced. Part of me thinks it could have been stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even hallucinations. Another part of me, the part that still wakes up sweating at 3 a.m., believes I saw something real. Something that didn't want to be caught on camera. Something that played with us like we were ants. I can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to. All I know is that Skinwalker Ranch isn't just a place where weird stuff happens. It's a place that decides who gets to know about it. And for some reason, for a brief, terrifying time, it decided to let me in. Story 2. I've lived in Delhi my whole life, and I thought I'd seen enough of the city's chaos to never be surprised again. But nothing prepared me for what happened in the summer of 2001. Everyone was already on edge. The air was heavy with heat and rumors, people whispering about some creature prowling the streets at night. Most folks laughed it off, saying it was just hysteria. Others swore they had seen it. Me? I didn't believe in monsters, at least not until the night I came face to face with it. It was late, past midnight, and the power had gone out in my neighborhood again. I had been lying on my cot on the roof because the heat inside was unbearable. The streets below were quiet, only the occasional bark of stray dogs breaking the silence. That's when I heard it, the sound of something heavy landing on the tin roof of the building across from mine. Not like a cat or monkey, it was louder, weightier. I propped myself up, thinking maybe a thief had climbed up. At first, I couldn't see anything in the dark. Then the faint glow from a distant streetlight caught movement. A figure stood crouched on the rooftop, and it wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It looked almost like a man, but smaller, covered in thick dark hair that seemed to swallow the light. What made my skin crawl was the way it held its head, tilted too far back, like it was sniffing the air. For a second, I thought I saw two red points glowing where its eyes should have been, flickering like dying embers. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but then it moved. Not climbed or walked, moved in a single bound across the roof like it was weightless. My heart started pounding. I kept still, praying it wouldn't notice me, but it did. It turned its head in my direction, and for the briefest second, the light caught something shiny on it, almost like a helmet or maybe metal covering part of its skull. I don't know, the dogs below went crazy, barking and howling like they were warning everyone to stay inside. And then, before I could even process what was happening, the thing leapt again, this time landing on the edge of my building. The tin awning rattled under the force, and I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was close enough now that I could see the way its hands, or claws, I don't know what they were, scraped against the wall. Sparks flew as if metal was grinding against stone. It crouched there for what felt like forever, just watching me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was some guy in a costume, some sick prank. But the way it hunched forward, the way its chest heaved, I could swear it wasn't human. I remember noticing something odd, like 3 round shapes on its chest, almost like buttons or lights. But they didn't glow. They just caught the faintest bit of light. I was trembling so hard my cot was shaking. I thought if I moved, it would pounce. Instead, without warning, it let out this strange sound. Not a growl, not a scream. Something in between, like metal scraping against itself mixed with an animal cry. My ears rang from it, and then, as quickly as it came, it jumped again, clearing the gap between my building and the next. I ran down the stairs, bolting myself inside, and didn't step onto the roof for weeks. The next morning, people were buzzing. Some neighbors claimed they heard something running across rooftops. Others said they saw a shadow darting past their windows. A few even claimed it scratched their doors. No one knew what to believe. The newspapers called it Monkey Man and wrote about hysteria spreading through the city. Some people said it was an avatar of Hanuman. Others swore it was just a thief in disguise. But I know what I saw, and no thief moves like that. Even now, I can't explain it. Maybe it was mass panic. Maybe my brain filled in the gaps in the dark. But I can still picture those glowing eyes, the claws sparking against the wall, and that unearthly cry. It wasn't just some wild animal. Whatever it was, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong here. And to this day, I sleep inside no matter how hot it gets. I'd rather sweat than risk seeing that thing again. Story 3. I've always heard people talk about strange things happening at sea, but I never thought I'd be the one to actually experience it. The ocean has this way of making you feel like you're somewhere between the living and the dead. Like it doesn't really care if you're there or not. You're just a small dot on an endless sheet of water. That's what it felt like the night I saw something I still can't explain. It was calm at first. The water was flat, almost too flat, like glass that had been stretched to the horizon. The air was heavy, and everything felt wrong in that quiet way that makes your skin prickle before you even know why. I'd been out there long enough to know when the sea had moods, and this one felt unnatural. I remember thinking that the silence sounded louder than the waves. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I saw shapes in the water, moving toward me slowly, lined up in rows. When I leaned over the railing to focus, my chest tightened. They looked like coffins, dark, endless coffins, drifting side by side as if someone had released hundreds of them into the current. They weren't bobbing or tipping the way normal debris would. They were moving too smoothly, like they had a purpose, like they knew where they were going. I rubbed my eyes and even splashed water on my face, telling myself I was tired. But when I looked again, there were more of them. It got to the point where the sea ahead of me looked completely covered, like I wouldn't be able to steer past them without hitting one. My stomach twisted when I realized I couldn't hear them knocking against the hull or the water slapping against them. They were silent, gliding, and yet I could see them plain as day under the moonlight. I backed away, thinking maybe I was losing it. I told myself stress or exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but when I turned toward the stern, I froze. The sky behind me was filled with what I thought were birds, hundreds of them. They circled the boat in jerky patterns, diving low enough that I could see the gleam of their wings. They looked like crows at first, but the longer I stared, the less sure I was. Their movements weren't natural. They seemed to shift in and out of focus. Like 1 second they were solid, and the next they were shadows. That wasn't even the worst part. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement right on the surface of the water. I turned and swore I saw motorcycles riding alongside the boat. People sitting upright as if they were tearing down a highway. The sound of engines should have been deafening, but it was silent. Their headlights flickered on and off, glowing dimly across the water. For a few seconds, I felt like I'd stepped into another world where the rules didn't apply anymore. I couldn't breathe. I gripped the railing so hard my fingers went numb. My brain was fighting itself, part of me saying it was impossible, the other part whispering that it was happening right in front of me. I closed my eyes and tried to count, thinking if I opened them again, it would all be gone. But when I did, the coffins were still there, stretching into the horizon. The birds still circled above, and those riders were still pacing the boat, moving in perfect rhythm with the waves. It went on for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. Eventually, the shapes started to blur, fading into the darkness until there was nothing left but the normal ocean again. I stood there shaking, not sure if I should be relieved or terrified. Even now, I don't know if it was some kind of hallucination, maybe from exhaustion or dehydration. I've heard stories about sailors seeing things that aren't there, whole phantom ships or armies marching across the sea. But this felt too real to just be my imagination. I can still picture the shine of the motorcycles on the water and the way the coffins drifted like they were waiting for something. I never told anyone in detail because I know how it sounds. A hallucination, sure. A tired mind playing tricks, maybe. But the way it all happened so quietly, with that heavy silence pressing down on me, I can't shake the feeling that I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And every time I'm out there now, alone on the water, I catch myself watching the horizon a little too closely, waiting for the coffins to come back. Story 4. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who posted on a paranormal forum, but something happened to me a couple of years ago that I've never been able to explain, and I can't shake it. I was in Romania, visiting a friend who lived in Cluj-Napoca, and I'd heard about the Hoia Baciu forest from travel blogs. A haunted forest sounded touristy and silly, and I figured it was just local legend hyped up for curious outsiders like me. But curiosity got the better of me, and one afternoon when I had some time to kill, I decided to go there by myself. I should have known better the moment I stepped past the tree line. The air felt heavier, thicker, like walking into a room where someone had been crying for hours. I didn't see anything right away that screamed paranormal, but there was this strange feeling crawling up the back of my neck, like someone's eyes were on me. I kept telling myself it was just the forest being quiet, but it wasn't quiet, it was too quiet. No birds, no rustling animals, not even the hum of insects. Just me, the crunch of leaves under my shoes, and that feeling that I wasn't alone. The trees themselves looked wrong. It wasn't just the odd twisting shapes I'd read about online, though those were weird enough. Some of them bent into tight spirals, like they had grown that way on purpose. A few had branches that curled back toward the trunk, like arms reaching to grab something that wasn't there. At first I thought it was kinda cool, like walking through some Tim Burton movie set. But after about 20 minutes, it started to get unsettling. It felt staged, like the forest was showing me something, almost daring me to notice the way it twisted itself into those impossible shapes. After a while, I came across an open clearing. It didn't look like the other parts of the forest. The grass was patchy, the ground scorched in weird circles, and the trees around the perimeter looked like they'd been burned. I crouched down to touch one of the blackened stumps, expecting it to feel charred or crumbly. But it was cold and smooth, almost like polished stone. I told myself it was probably lightning strikes or something logical, but my stomach had already started to turn. That's when I realized my skin was itching. At first, just my arms, then my neck, and within minutes it felt like tiny needles pricking all over my body. I scratched until my nails left red streaks, but the itch didn't stop. My head started pounding with this sudden, sharp migraine, and I had to sit down because my balance felt off. The longer I stayed in that clearing, the worse it got. My chest was tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I thought about leaving, but every direction I turned, the forest looked the same. The path I thought I'd come from wasn't there anymore, just more crooked trees. Panic started to creep in. I pulled out my phone to use the GPS, but the screen flickered, then went black. It wasn't the battery, it had been fully charged. I pressed the power button over and over, but nothing happened. Then as I was standing there staring at the dead screen, I thought I heard something move behind me. It wasn't an animal. It was slower, heavier, like a footstep. I spun around, but no one was there. Just the trees, leaning a little closer than they had before. Or maybe that was in my head. I held my breath, listening. Then I heard it again. This time it was closer, deliberate, like someone was dragging their foot along the dirt just to make sure I knew they were behind me. My whole body went cold. I told myself to walk, not run, so I started moving back the way I thought I'd come, even though the forest seemed determined to confuse me. Every few steps I'd hear the sound again, one dragging step, then silence, as if it was waiting for me to react. I tried not to look back, but at one point I did, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw something between the trees, a shadow shaped like a person, but taller and thinner than anyone should be. It didn't move like a person either. It shifted, almost bending along with the trees, blending into them until I couldn't be sure I'd seen it at all. The itching on my skin had turned into a burning, and my headache was blinding by then. My stomach churned, and I was so dizzy I had to grab onto one of the twisted trunks to steady myself. My hand burned where it touched the bark, like I'd pressed it against a hot stove. I yanked it back, and when I looked down, there were faint red marks across my palm, like scratches. At some point, I honestly don't know how long I wandered, I stumbled out of the forest. One moment I was surrounded by those warped trees, and the next I was back on a gravel road, with sunlight hitting my face. I can't explain how I found the way out. I don't even remember making a clear turn. It felt like 1 second I was lost, and the next the forest had decided it was done with me. By the time I made it back to Cluj, the marks on my skin had faded, but the headache lingered for 2 days straight. When I charged my phone, it powered back on like nothing had happened. I checked the timestamps, and I'd been in that forest for over 3 hours, though it had felt more like 40 minutes. The part that keeps me up sometimes is the shadow. I've convinced myself it was just my brain playing tricks in a creepy setting, but I can't shake how real it felt. And the footsteps. I wasn't imagining those. I know the sound of someone following me, and there was something in there with me. Some people I've told think it was anxiety, maybe a panic attack. Others have said the forest is full of electromagnetic activity that messes with your head and your devices. But none of that explains the burns on my hand, or why the forest felt alive, like it was watching me, deciding whether I could leave. I've traveled a lot since then, and I've gone hiking in forests all over the world. Nothing has ever felt like Hoia Baciu. I'll never go back. Sometimes when I think about that day, I wonder about the shepherd who supposedly vanished there with his sheep. Everyone laughs at that story, but after what I felt in that place, I can believe the forest takes people. And I think it nearly decided to keep me too. Story 5. I used to think the scariest sounds were the ones you couldn't recognize. Now I know it's worse when you do recognize them, but they come at the wrong time, in the wrong place. Like they don't belong to the world, you know. That night outside Kelly, Kentucky taught me that lesson the hard way. It was August of 1985, a sweltering night that pressed down on the fields like a heavy blanket. I had been staying at the house just outside town, helping out with chores and keeping an eye on things. Everyone else had gone to bed early, but I wasn't ready to sleep. The cicadas were screaming, and the air smelled of damp earth. I decided to sit by the window, hoping for a breeze. That's when I saw it, the streak of light in the sky. At first, I thought it was a shooting star, but instead of burning out, it seemed to sink lower, almost like it was trying to land. The light cut across the tree line and dropped out of sight somewhere behind the ridge. There was no explosion, no smoke, just silence that felt too sudden, like the night had been muted. I remember holding my breath, waiting for some sound, an engine, maybe even thunder, but nothing came. I told myself it was a meteor. That's the easiest thing to believe. But minutes later, the dogs outside started going crazy. They weren't barking at each other the way they sometimes did. It was this panicked, high-pitched whining that made the hair stand up on my arms. I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, sweeping the beam over the yard. The air was so still it felt wrong, like the whole countryside was holding its breath with me. That's when I saw movement by the tree line. At first, it looked like a kid crouching low, but the closer I looked, the less sense it made. The thing seemed small, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, with a body that glinted strangely in the light. I thought maybe it was wet, but when the beam hit it, the reflection wasn't water. It was like its skin was metallic, shining back at me. The eyes were the worst part. They weren't glowing on their own, but when the flashlight caught them, they lit up like big, round mirrors. They didn't blink. They just locked on me, and I couldn't move for a second. Then almost casually, it lifted its long arms and pulled itself forward like it didn't have joints the way we do. I slammed the door and backed away, trying to tell myself it was an animal, a deformed owl maybe, or something caught in the beam. I stayed by the window, but the dogs had gone silent now, like they knew to hide. My stomach sank because silence in the country is never a good thing. I thought it had gone, but then I heard scratching on the roof. Not heavy footsteps, not something big, just faint scraping, like metal against tin. I ran to wake the others, but by the time I turned back, there was a shadow by the window. The head was too big, with pointed ears or maybe just a strange shape, and it leaned in so close that the glass fogged up. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but then the glass trembled like something was pressing against it. I yanked the curtain shut and waited, heart hammering, but the sound of scratching moved along the wall, slow and deliberate, like it was circling the house. For the rest of the night, it was a game of waiting. Every so often, I'd hear thuds on the roof or the faint tap-tap of claws against the siding. Once, when I worked up the nerve to peek outside, I saw two of them standing together at the edge of the yard. They weren't attacking, just watching, their huge reflective eyes catching every bit of light like mirrors hung in the dark. The strangest part was how calm they seemed. They didn't screech or charge. They just stared, moved a little closer, then froze again. It was like they were studying us the way we might watch animals in a cage. By dawn, the scratching stopped. The dogs wouldn't come out from under the porch until the sun was high. I searched the yard for footprints, but the ground was dry and hard. The only thing I found were odd patches where the grass looked singed, like something had pressed down with heat instead of weight. I know what people say, that it was owls or people's nerves playing tricks. Maybe that makes sense, but I can't explain how owls end up with metallic skin that reflects light like a mirror, or how they tap along a roof like they're testing the walls. I never saw them again after that night, but I can still picture those eyes staring in through the window, unblinking, patient. It's been decades, and sometimes I still wake up in the dark thinking I hear that faint scraping on the roof. Part of me hopes it really was just nerves, but another part knows I'll never be sure. Story 6. I've always thought of long drives as kind of peaceful. Just me, the road, and whatever music my old truck radio decided to pick up that night. Back then, I was younger, newly married, and working as a football coach at a small college in Montana. My commute home was nothing but miles of empty fields. No lights, no houses, just endless crops waving in the wind. On clear evenings, the sky stretched out forever, almost too big for the world below it. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just the way home. One late summer evening, I saw a man walking along the shoulder of the road. Normally, I wouldn't stop, but in that part of Montana, it wasn't unusual. People did it all the time, and you just assumed they were stranded or needed a ride into town. He stood out immediately. He wasn't dressed like anyone I'd expect to see out there. He had on an oversized suit, way too warm for that weather, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. His clothes looked like something out of another decade, maybe the 40s or 50s. I figured maybe he'd fallen on hard times. Maybe all he had were those clothes. I slowed down and let him in without thinking too much about it. He climbed into the passenger seat without a word. He didn't look at me, didn't smile, didn't even nod, just slid onto the bench seat and faced forward. I asked him where he needed to go, but he didn't answer. He just raised his hand slightly and pointed forward like I was supposed to keep driving. The silence was heavy, but I kept the truck rolling. After a couple of minutes, I tried again. Small talk, simple stuff, where he was headed if he was from around here. Nothing. He shifted under the hat, pulling it lower, almost like he was trying to disappear into the seat. I told myself he was probably exhausted, maybe dehydrated. Hitchhiking in the heat would do that. I kept driving, glancing at him every now and then, but he stayed still. Finally, after several miles, he lifted his head. He didn't look at me. Instead, he turned to the window and said in this flat, heavy voice that I needed to stop the truck. No explanation, no please, no thanks. Just that I needed to stop. Something in his tone told me not to argue, so I eased the truck to the side of the road. He stepped out slowly, stood there for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and then, without warning, bolted into the field beside us. Full sprint, no hesitation. 1 second he was next to the truck, the next he was crashing through the crops, swallowed up by the tall grain. I sat there waiting, thinking maybe he'd had some sort of emergency. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he'd come back out once he handled whatever it was. But the minutes ticked by and nothing happened. Just the sound of crickets and the breeze moving the stalks. Eventually, I figured it was none of my business. People do strange things, and I didn't want to stick around in case he came back angry. I got back into the truck and started to pull onto the road. That old truck didn't accelerate fast, so I had to ease back up to speed. I checked the rear view mirror to make sure the road was clear, and that's when I saw him again. He wasn't standing. He wasn't even walking. He was down on all fours, moving through the road dust like an animal, and he was fast. Faster than a person should be in that position. His hands and feet slapped the ground as he kept pace with the truck while I tried to gain speed. I pressed harder on the gas, but the truck fishtailed a little on the gravel shoulder, the rear end slipping as I fought to keep control. My eyes kept going back to the mirror because he wasn't slowing down. The way he moved is burned into my head. Not like someone jogging or crawling, but jerky, unsteady, almost unnatural. His head was tilted down, hat still on, like he didn't even need to look where he was going. Just that awful mechanical run on all fours, closing in as if he had all the time in the world. My stomach flipped when I realized I couldn't hear his footsteps over the truck engine. It was like he was gliding, almost silent, but somehow still slamming forward at a speed that didn't make sense. Finally, the truck gained traction, and I picked up speed. By the time I was pushing past 50, I didn't see him anymore. The mirror showed nothing but an empty dirt road stretching behind me. Still, I didn't slow down until I hit a gas station a few towns over. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the payphone to call my wife. I told her everything, stumbling over my words, half convinced she'd laugh. Instead, she told me something that froze me more than the hitchhiker had. At her office earlier that week, a coworker had shared almost the exact same story. A man dressed out of place, picked up on a lonely road, who ran off into the fields only to appear again, chasing a car like something inhuman. I'd never mentioned it before, but she said it was considered an old urban legend in the area. Some of the locals used to talk about it just to scare the newer people in town. I wanted to believe that's all it was, some coincidence, a story that had twisted over time until people started seeing what they expected to see. But that doesn't explain how close he got to me. It doesn't explain the sound of his body hitting the ground with every stride, or the speed that no person should have been able to reach on all fours. It's been years since then, and I don't drive those roads anymore. Even now, when I think back to it, I can't decide if what I saw was a person, a hallucination, or something worse. All I know is that every time I check my rearview mirror at night, I half expect to see that figure again, sprinting through the dark, closing the distance. Story 7. I'd been on the road long enough to know when something wasn't normal. Most roads are boring, just hours of highway and coffee, but this one stuck with me. It started at the Hanford site, a place I'd only heard about in passing. Nuclear testing, contamination, shutdown. I didn't know much, and I didn't ask questions. Truckers learn early that asking too many questions only makes people suspicious. All I knew was I had a pickup there, and it was already waiting. When I pulled in, 2 black SUVs rolled up behind me like they had been expecting me. They didn't flash badges or explain who they were. They just told me they'd be following. That was it. No small talk, no paperwork. I thought maybe it was some kind of Department of Energy load, though I'd never seen escorts like that before. They stayed glued to me as I pulled the trailer out, one in front, one behind. My cab felt less like a truck and more like a cage with them boxing me in. The strangest things started at the weigh station. Normally, it's routine. Pull up, paperwork, scales, maybe a quick inspection. But the second I stopped, the front SUV driver stepped out, showed something to the staff inside, and waved me through without a single check. I didn't even hand over my logs. He just told me to keep going. That had never happened before, not once in my career. Hours into the drive, curiosity started to get to me. I kept checking my mirrors. The SUV behind me always had tinted windows. No matter how long I looked, I never saw a face, not even a shadow of movement. It was like the thing was empty but still driving. The one in front of me was just as bad. No license plate I could make out. Just a blur of black metal. I tried the radio a few times, casual chatter on the CB like most of us do to pass the time, but every time I spoke, the signal fuzzed out, static like someone was jamming it. Other truckers came in clear when I wasn't talking, but the second I keyed in, it cut off. I thought maybe my radio was dying, but it only happened during this trip. The closer I got to Nevada, the more I felt it. A hum, not from the truck but from the trailer itself, like standing near a transformer on a hot day. Low and steady, right in my chest. I turned the music up to drown it out, but the hum kept pushing through, almost vibrating the steering wheel. Every time I stopped for fuel, the SUVs pulled in too, never more than 20 feet away. I wasn't allowed near the trailer. Every time I made the smallest move toward checking the straps, one of them would step out and shake their head. They didn't need words. I wasn't supposed to look. That night I pulled into a rest stop in Arizona. Dead quiet, middle of nowhere. The SUVs parked, one at each end of my rig. I tried to sleep in the cab, but the hum in the trailer seemed louder in the stillness. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sharp knocking sound from inside the trailer. 3 knocks, then silence. I froze. Cargo shifts sometimes, sure, but this didn't sound like a shift. It sounded like someone or something tapping deliberately. I held my breath, listening. A minute later, it came again. 3 knocks, slow, spaced out. I stared at the rear view, half expecting to see the SUV drivers checking it out, but no one moved. The vehicles just sat there, dark and quiet. Against better judgment, I climbed down and walked a few feet toward the trailer, just to listen closer. As I stood there, the air felt wrong, heavy, like the oxygen had thinned. My skin prickled, and that low hum buzzed harder in my chest, almost in sync with my heartbeat. Then, another sound joined it, like a faint scratching, as if nails or claws were dragging along the metal walls inside. I backed away quick, pretending I was just stretching my legs, but I knew they saw me. The rear SUV door cracked open slightly, just enough to show they were watching. I climbed back into the cab and didn't leave again until dawn. When I finally reached the drop-off, a secure site in Nevada, the escorts waved me through multiple gates without any of the normal procedures. I parked where they told me, and the SUVs pulled in tight. Before I even had the chance to unhook, a crew in full protective suits surrounded the trailer. They didn't waste time. They waved me off, told me I was done, and one guy handed me a slip with a signature. That was it. No scale ticket, no receipt, nothing official looking. I drove away empty, still buzzing from the hum that seemed to stay with me even after the trailer was gone. My chest felt like it was vibrating for hours afterward. To this day, I have no idea what I hauled. Maybe it was just some kind of sensitive equipment. Maybe the hum was electrical interference. Maybe the knocks were just shifting weight. But I can't shake the memory of that scratching sound, the one that didn't match the rhythm of the road. It felt too alive. Story 8. I grew up hearing about strange things in the countryside, but I never thought I'd stumble into one myself. It happened a few summers ago when I went to visit my uncle's farm in a small Swedish village called Röden. His house sat right on the edge of the woods with long fields stretching down to a creek. The place always felt quiet, almost too quiet, like the silence had a weight to it. I didn't know then how much that silence would stick with me. I was out walking one morning, just trying to clear my head. The air smelled sharp and earthy after a night of rain, and the grass was wet enough to soak through my shoes. I remember thinking it was strange how the field looked so alive, bright green, dotted with wildflowers, except for one spot. From a distance, it looked like a shadow burned into the earth. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a patch of mud or some burned-out circle. It was a cross, perfectly shaped, edges straight, pressed into the ground like someone had carved it with a giant blade. The dirt inside it looked darker than the soil around it, almost black, and nothing grew there. The grass stopped cleanly at the edges, like it refused to spill in. At first, I figured it was just one of those odd things that happens in farmland. Soil damage, maybe fertilizer, maybe a bad patch. But my uncle caught me standing there and shook his head before I could even ask. He told me not to waste my time staring at it, said people had been dealing with that thing for years, and no matter what they did, it always came back. He explained how the villagers had tried digging it out, filling it with fresh dirt, even laying stones over it. Every single time the mark returned, plants placed in it shriveled within days. He said the oldest farmers in Röden swore the cross had been there since their grandfather's time. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. I lay in bed listening to the wind knock against the window shutters, and I swore I heard faint scratching sounds like nails dragging on wood. I told myself it was just tree branches. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cross had something to do with it. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I brought a spade out to the field when no one was watching. The soil inside the cross felt different, almost loose, like it had been stirred recently, even though the ground around it was packed tight. I dug maybe a foot down, expecting to find rocks or roots, but it was just more of that dark soil. The weird part was the smell. It wasn't like normal dirt. It carried this faint metallic tang, almost like old blood. That night the scratching returned, but louder. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and realized it wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from below, under the floorboards. I didn't dare check. I just sat there, frozen until the sound faded with the dawn. The next morning, my uncle noticed the disturbed soil. He asked if I had been messing with the cross. I lied at first, but he just gave me a look, so I admitted it. He told me in a low voice that people who tried to tamper with it often regretted it. One man who had hauled dirt to fill it ended up with half his livestock dead within a week. Another swore he saw figures standing in the cross at night, like silhouettes rising from the earth. My uncle said he didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in leaving things alone. I wish I'd listened. That evening, I went back alone with a flashlight. I just wanted to see if anything strange would happen. The field was dead quiet, not even crickets. When I shined the light over the cross, the beam seemed to sink into the soil, like it was being swallowed. I stood there for a while, waiting, and then I noticed movement. The dirt inside the cross shifted, just slightly, like something was breathing beneath it. I ran back to the house, trying to convince myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. But later, when I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of being buried alive. In the dream, I could hear muffled voices chanting above me, and every time I tried to scream, soil filled my mouth. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't go near the cross again. But when I stepped outside, I saw something that froze me. My boot prints from the night before were still there, pressed deep into the mud around the cross. But inside the cross, where I had stood, there were no marks at all. The soil looked smooth, untouched, like it had erased any evidence I'd been there. For the rest of my stay, I avoided that part of the field. Still, I swear the scratching followed me. Even after I returned home, for weeks I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard that same noise under my bed. Eventually it stopped, but I can't say why. I don't know what the cross is, or why nothing grows there. Some people in the village think it's just bad soil or some chemical left over in the ground. Others think it marks something buried long ago, something that doesn't want to be uncovered. All I know is that when I picture that patch of earth, I still feel the same unease in my chest. If you ever find yourself in Royan and see that cross in the field, don't go near it. Don't dig. Don't touch. Some things I've learned don't want to be disturbed. Story 9. I always thought the strangest things I'd ever see in my life would be the usual. Bad storms, car accidents, maybe some odd coincidences you shake your head at later. But what happened in Caneto di Caronia still doesn't sit right with me, and I was there to witness it firsthand. It wasn't something you could shrug off as a freak event. It felt like the kind of thing that makes you question reality, the kind of thing you'd expect Mulder and Scully to roll up for. It started with the smell of burning when nothing was burning. I was at my uncle's house in Caneto, sitting in the living room one afternoon. The lights flickered for a second, then steadied. Not unusual. Power in that area had always been temperamental, but then the television screen went black, and a sharp, acrid smell filled the room. I thought maybe the wiring inside had fried. My uncle unplugged it, pulled the back panel off, but there were no scorched marks, no burnt wires. Just that overwhelming smell. A day later, the microwave in the kitchen caught fire while no one was even using it. You'd think faulty wiring, right? That was everyone's first thought, except the power company shut down electricity to the entire village after a few more incidents. We lived in complete blackout. No lights, no appliances. And still, appliances kept burning. Toasters, radios, even a hairdryer left inside a drawer. It melted like it had been placed in an oven. The part that unnerved me the most wasn't the fires themselves, but how they seemed to wait until you were nearby, like they wanted you to see. One evening, I walked into my cousin's bedroom to grab something, and right as I stepped inside, the alarm clock on his nightstand sparked and caught flame. Not an old clock either, but brand new, with the plug already yanked out of the wall. I froze, watching the plastic bubble and melt as if someone had poured acid over it. My cousin ran in, and we doused it with water, but the look we gave each other afterwards said what neither of us wanted to admit. This wasn't normal. People started whispering about curses. Others blamed underground gas leaks or weird static charges from the sea. Scientists came, poked around with their instruments, gave theories about electromagnetic anomalies, but none of their explanations made sense when you lived through it. I watched a cordless phone catch fire while sitting untouched on a shelf. No battery, no power connected. Just a lifeless hunk of plastic that decided to combust for no reason at all. Nights were the worst. In the dark, with no electricity and everyone on edge, even the smallest sound would jolt you awake. I remember lying in bed, listening to the waves crash outside, when a sudden flash lit up my room. The air smelled like ozone, sharp and metallic. I rushed to the kitchen and found a pile of clothes smoldering in the corner, though no one had put them near any source of heat. The flames were small, easy to stomp out, but I'll never forget the feeling that something had set them deliberately. What made it even creepier was how selective the fires seemed. It was never random piles of paper or dry wood, always machines, appliances, things that hummed with electricity or carried current at some point. When the government cut all power to the town, we thought it would end. Instead, it escalated. Houses were stripped bare, every electronic removed, yet new fires sparked up anyway. Some locals swore they saw blue sparks dancing across the floor tiles or running along the walls like lightning trapped inside the house. I tried convincing myself it was science, that there had to be some rational explanation, but there were moments that chipped away at that logic. Once, while helping my aunt clean up, I set down my phone on the table and turned to grab a broom. A popping sound made me spin back around, and I watched my phone case start to smoke. Not hot to the touch, not damaged, just smoke seeping out as if invisible hands were squeezing it. I snatched it up, panicking, but it was cool in my hand. The smoke vanished as fast as it appeared, leaving nothing behind. Over time, people grew restless. Some families abandoned their homes completely, saying they'd rather live in tents on the hillside than under roofs that seemed to ignite on their own. The authorities called in more experts, even the military, but nobody could pin down the cause. There were days of silence, stretches when nothing happened, and you'd start to relax. Then, without warning, another fire would erupt, often when you were least prepared. It gave the whole town this atmosphere of dread, like we were living inside a ticking bomb. I left Caneto after a few months, but I still think about it. Every so often, I check online to see if it ever stopped for good, and the reports keep surfacing, fires starting up again after years of quiet. Some say it's all down to strange electromagnetic fields. Others claim it's man-made sabotage. But standing there, watching lifeless objects burst into flames in front of my eyes, I can tell you it didn't feel scientific. It felt personal. I'll say this much. If your phone or your toaster or any machine in your house suddenly sparks without warning, don't shrug it off. Don't assume it's faulty wiring, because I've seen firsthand what happens when fire decides it doesn't need a reason to start. Story 10. I've worked as a radio astronomer for years, and most of the time, it's not nearly as exciting as people think. Hours spent staring at data, listening to static, hoping that some pattern or anomaly will break through the noise. It's quiet work, repetitive even, but every so often something happens that sticks with you forever. For me, it was 1998. I was working late, staring at the readouts from a telescope that had been pointed toward the center of the galaxy. What I experienced that night never left me, and honestly, I still can't explain it without second-guessing myself. The shift had been dull until the signal hit. At first, it was just a spike in the noise floor, sharp, sudden, unmistakable. I figured it was interference, maybe a piece of equipment acting up, but then it kept coming back, not just once, but in bursts. Each one lasted nearly 10 minutes, and then it would vanish again, leaving the monitors dead silent for exactly 77 minutes before the next one returned. By the second burst, my stomach tightened. By the third, I felt like the room itself was holding its breath. When you spend enough time around signals, you learn to tell the difference between random noise and something structured. These weren't random. They were powerful, distinct, like some invisible voice calling out across the void. No drifting, no fading, no natural shape I could easily pin down. It was almost rhythmic, and that scared me more than anything. Rhythms mean patterns, and patterns mean intent. I stayed glued to my seat as each burst came and went. 10 minutes of overwhelming intensity, then more than an hour of dead silence. Every time the silence fell, I thought I could hear something else in the control room, a faint humming in the equipment that wasn't there before, or maybe just the way the air seemed heavier. I started to feel like I wasn't just picking up a signal from space, but that the signal itself was pressing against the walls around me. By the fifth burst, I was shaken. Nothing about it felt right. It was as if I had been waiting for something to follow, like the bursts were building towards some final event. But then, nothing. After that fifth signal, it went quiet. Completely quiet. No tapering off, no distortion, just an end. I logged everything, saved the data, checked the instruments a dozen times. Everything looked fine. The signal was real. That's what unsettled me most. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the sequence in my head, convinced that if I had stayed longer or tuned differently, I might have caught something else. The silence after the last burst was worse than the bursts themselves. It was like the sound of someone hanging up the phone after you realize they've been listening the entire time. The next few days, I went back through the recordings again and again. No one else had ever seen anything quite like it. We nicknamed it the Great Galactic Burper, half as a joke, half as a way to keep ourselves from thinking too much about how weird it really was. Scientists like to put funny names on things that scare them. It makes the unknown easier to swallow. But deep down, I couldn't laugh about it. Here's the part that really keeps me up at night. Every time I replayed those bursts, I could swear I heard something faint beneath the main noise, like an echo or a whisper buried under static. I tried filtering it, boosting it, analyzing it every way I knew how. The rational part of me says it was just interference from the equipment, some bleed through from our systems. But the paranoid part of me insists it wasn't, because every time I listened, it felt like the whispers were shaping into words. Words that were almost in English, but not quite. The worst was one night when I stayed long after my shift, headphones on, replaying the data yet again. The building was empty, lights dimmed, everyone else gone. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted, and let the burst wash through me one more time. And in that silence between signals, when there should have been nothing at all, I heard my name, clear as day. I tore the headphones off immediately, heart pounding, convinced I was just sleep-deprived and imagining things. But I swear on my life, it was there. A voice, low and stretched, calling me like it had always been waiting. After that, I stopped listening at night. I filed my reports, shared the data, and moved on to other projects. Officially, it went down as an unexplained radio transient, a curiosity in the records. No follow-ups, no repeats. To this day, no one has ever picked it up again. But for me, it never really ended. Sometimes when I'm lying awake, I still feel that same pressure in the air I felt in the control room. That strange weight, like something just outside of view, is paying attention. I'll catch myself listening for it, waiting for another burst, even though I know it will probably never come, or maybe it already did, and I just wasn't tuned in. The scientific part of me knows it could have been anything. Equipment error, interference, some natural cosmic event we just don't understand yet. But the rest of me, the part that still gets goosebumps remembering that whisper, thinks otherwise. It felt personal, like something intelligent reached out for a moment, noticed me, and then went silent again. And the silence is worse than any noise.